Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. We're delighted to have Tom back. Tom spoke for us before. Many of you know his 18 years in Shanghai, wrote books, did a lot of wonderful, interesting things. I know his brother as well. For those of you who don't know, his brother is very famous in New York City. But I told Dan that in this part of the world, nobody knows him. In this part of the world, we call him the brother of Tom. But Dan happened to be the deputy mayor of New York, and later the CEO of Bloomberg, until Michael Bloomberg wants to get back into the company himself. But anyway, we expect that. So we're delighted that Tom is with us here today. He's going to go back to the United States. So perhaps this is your swan song in terms of, not that you don't come back, but I mean a conclusion of your certain aspects of your observations of the last 18 years. Write a new chapter. No. I'm more interested in the last chapter. The last 18 years, your observation in China. I think that would be very interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Tom Doctoroff. Thank you very much.
I am quite nervous to give this presentation because, Alice mentioned that interview. But the guy that wrote that interview, I think, is a millennial. And he wrote a book called China's Millennials. And throughout the entire discussion, I could feel, that he was very skeptical of everything that I was saying, And I said, please remember, there's no blacks or whites, right? So I'm going to be saying something with perhaps a very specific point of view, but I would welcome any challenges or any disagreements, to this, because there are no China experts. Everybody is just trying to develop a sharper point of view to learn more as the country evolves and country relationship with the word evolves. But you can see where I'm going with this presentation. It's called Old World, New Minds. Yes, the new generation is becoming more modern. Yes, the new generation is becoming more internationalized, but they are not becoming Western. And from the very beginning, I would like to define the term individualism, because you can define it in many different ways. Individualism, as I define it, is the encouragement of society to define yourself independent of society. So, of course, we all need to productively engage with society, but we are taught to express ourselves and know who we are, what our true desires are, and if we're not fully satisfied, what do? We go to a psychotherapist. And in China, you don't unless you need medication, all right? So the structure of this presentation is going to be actually comparing old youth and new youth first, the post-80s generation with the post-90s generation, similarities and differences, and then I'm going to bring it down into a master insight, all right? A tension in the heart of the post-90s generation that marketers and businesses can use to increase the relevance of the products they produce in consumers' lives. So pardon me, I'll start off with some very broad cultural observations and then bring it down to some application. So we're talking about 18 to 24-year-old today, all right? So these are or maybe a little bit older, 20 to 26, all right? And it's the next gold stream, the next gold mine. It's the next mainstream. It's 135 million people. So it's a huge, huge demographic, all right? And I just want to first start off with a quote by Li Ning. As many of you know, he is a sports iconic hero, and they did a disastrous effort celebrating the post-90s generation, and you'll start to see why from this quote. This generation is not lured by the star power as past generations are. They are young and hard to interpret, but will become the pillar of China in the next 10 to 15 years. They are better educated than consumers from past generations. It's not really giving a center of gravity of what this generation actually is and what its core drivers are. And you can see, actually, that communications, advertising, I'm not allowed to say advertising anymore. Now I have to say that I am an engineer of media-neutral, idea-centric participation platforms. All right, and this is not a television commercial. This is a media-neutral filmic expression. But anyhow, this is for Buick, all right? And this is targeted at the post-80s generation. Take a look at what is going on right here. It's basically the first generation of freedom. It's rebellion, and it's going to say, I'm going to achieve things my way, but I am not going to accept the status quo. Very
从小到大，身边总是有一个什么都比我好的人，那就是别人家的那谁谁谁。你看，别人家那谁考上了公务员，你看，别人家那谁结婚又买房。我才不要成为那谁那谁那谁谁谁。 前进的方向由我自己决定，跟着别人走没门。
So you can see that this is what you'd call 反抗社会一点的 but it's still quite safe, right? And it's just basically saying there's new opportunities out there. Now take a look at what Leaning did when it tried to celebrate the new ethos of the post-90s generation. It's all fog. And this was laughed at on social networks. It was a colossal failure.
我只是对一成不变，不敢沟通。
别老拿我跟别人比较。
I only compare with myself, inch by inch.
你们为我安排的路总是让我迷路。You won't find
the new world with an old map.
我更相信，变就是力量
Change is strength.
让改变发生。90后黎明
Make change.
Make the change.
Make the change. All of these are open-ended, right? All of these are you define the world as you want to define it, lead the change, but it doesn't say how. It doesn't give a framework. It doesn't give you an opportunity to have freedom in a framework. And what Chinese people want is to have freedom, but in a framework. And so you can see that the generations, and we're going to be comparing the two a little bit, are look and feel very differently. Like we all know that's Supergirl, right? You know, Liu Chun, and she actually she's a very independent-minded person. Her lyrics are very soulful. She redefined conventional beauty. She didn't have the typical round face, you know, with gentle features. This is a movie here about success, you know, made in America, basically. And here's a typical love story picture. The man looks like a man. The woman looks like a woman. Here, the woman looks like a man, and the man looks like a woman. You know, and then you've got the most successful series of all time, called Tiny Times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till Roman numeral 12. These are epic dramas about nothing. And then you have, you know, people here that are, let's just say, androgynous. So there are shifts going on. There are rules that are being bent and broken. So let's call the 80s old youth, the people that are born in the 80s, and let's call the 90s new youth. And let's take a look at the differences. And I think that we can talk about them in terms of formative experience very quickly. Different upbringings, so as a result, there are different worldviews. Second is they are different parents of different generations, so the relationship between the parents and the kids are different, and different socioeconomic beginnings, and so there's different expectations of progress and material success. So, very quickly, different upbringing leading to different worldview, 不一样的世界观，不一样的成长环境. So, very simply put, in the 80s, growing up was not very complicated, all right? It was, I just call it storybooks, skipping, and simplicity. And you can take a look at a lot of the things that touch the hearts of people that are born in the 80s. So these are jumping games, you know, they're playing at school. This is something very strange that I think still happens. It's eye exercises because they're getting so tired. 操饱, right? Fishing, you know, orange soda, orange juice was a treat. You know, people were doing homework, but in very modest ways, no computers. You know, you had very basic black and white television, action figures from movies, marbles, and a character, a very moral character called Huluwa, all right? And of course, importantly, knowledge was top down, all right? Knowledge is know what you are told. You know, this is the way that it should be, and everything was framed for the students, right? It was a mastery of received wisdom that inherently was Confucian in nature and backward looking. So just take a look at some of these photographs. Well, these are the book readers that people learn to read, and that's how I learned my Chinese characters, by reading very out-of-date primary school readers. So everything there had a political message, every single one. Perhaps they still do. But I still remember, all right, one story on credit card usage, because now that was in the early 90s. Credit cards were very, very new, and it was a gift from the government, the patriarch of Communist Party, to help the masses because it made their lives more convenient. So you have Xiao Xiandui, the young pioneers. You had just a few media. This here is a Sixiang Pingde, you know, moral thought. And this character here was a paragon of morality as well. So again, it was about mastery of received wisdom. But in the 90s, or the 90s kids, they were able to, through technology, a broader worldview, to discover the world, open up to the world. So 90s, the idea of having fun in childhood, celebrating at least on one level, perhaps a little bit of superficial level, the non-tiger mom ethos, so that childhood was a period of entertainment and freedom became acceptable to at least talk about. And there was an explosion of entertainment and playful alternatives, from Japanese spy characters to runrun.com to more sophisticated computer games. And the snacking palette was much brighter and much broader. And then even when you started getting into the first areas of cyber reality and dance games, so it was much more fun, it was much more open, and the windows of the world were broad. But of course, this is the first time that when they were growing up, they were able to see the dark side of things. So again, this is one story of a prostitute, who committed murder. This is the Wenzhou train accident, the suicides at Foxconn, and then other crimes. This was depicted in Zhang Jiake's film right here. So the dark side started becoming part of the youth. A Touch of Evil, A Touch of Sin is the name of this movie.
截至目前，事故已经造成35人遇难。
你是叫小玉吧？我是家里的老婆。
好像客人多吗？
Just to say that darkness is happening now. It's not all scrubbed clean.
你能不能当着全村人的面说一说村里的经济问题？
再不是搞子进玻璃了。
These are all based on real life events.
我不是小姐，回家找你老婆去。
I think you get the point. Darkness. So there are different worldviews. The post-80s, okay, they were relatively naive, okay, and the post-90s now are relatively speaking, and again, I'm not speaking in blacks and whites, doubtful. They don't necessarily have complete confidence. So second difference is parents of different generations. That leads to different family dynamics. The 80s suffered from this. The forbidden feather duster, which was the corporal punishment tool of choice, all right? But 1950s parents, of course, went through a much greater shock and tribulation, throughout their formative years. So they suffered 3 great years of great famine during the Dayue Jing. There was the Cultural Revolution, the Wanhua Dageming, where the entire social structure got inverted, and what became Chinese by traditional means became bad, and what became un-Chinese became good, except for worship of the emperor, that is Mao. There were layoffs later on when the state reforms happened. All right, so the parents, relatively speaking, of these kids, relatively speaking, I keep on saying, are collectivistic, patriotic, and frugal. So they're relatively authoritative. And I remember when I came to China in 1998, I had never seen a broader generation gap than when I saw there. That generation gap now has completely become more, not completely, become more narrow. All right. So in the 1960s, parents who basically, had kids of the post-90s, they went back to college. They were aware of democratic awakenings, both in Tiananmen and around the world. And then they were participating in a pop cultural boom that was born in Greater China and then in China itself. So again, relatively speaking, these parents were idealistic, democratic, and disoriented. They were relatively open-minded, and so as a result, the generation gap is relatively narrow. And that's why you have a lot of young people today that are talking about the fact for the first time, I can be friends with my parents, or my parents and I have a 非常亲密的跟朋友一样的关系。
父母的关系还是挺好的。
和谐。
非常和谐的，然后非常有爱吧。
比较像朋友。
很和谐，
他们就很关心我，然后爱护我，他们会听取我的意见，而不是直接告诉我你应该做什么，而是先问你想做什么，你应该怎么去做到这些事情。
基本上学的东西还是按照我自己的兴趣来的。
同时，他们也给我很多比较独立的环境，就是可以让我成长，做自己想做的事情。然后我觉得很。
Now, this is a very deep question. Are the parents really friends with the kids? Well, I'll just tell you that we market a lot of infant nutrition products, okay? And historically it's always been based on be the brightest kid in the class, and by the end of the commercial you have a 2-year-old kid wearing a graduation cap from Harvard. Now there's this idea of progressive parenthood, where kids and parents learn together. But let me tell you, that lasts for 6 months, all right? You have to eventually have kids be the smartest in the class still. But people talk about, this newer type of relationship as an ideal and something to aspire to. So we can just say that there are different family dynamics, that there was an acknowledged wide gap from the 80s, and the post-90s now, it's relatively, as you've heard again and again, 和谐, 和谐. So it's harmonious. Third key difference are different socioeconomic beginnings. So that leads to different dreams and different expectations about the future between the post-80s generation and the post-90s. The post-80s, they grew up relatively poor, and they grew up when Shanghai was relatively flat, and it was relatively gray and relatively dusty, not colorful. And so all of the parts of their childhood reflected a lack of material wealth, whether it be eating in the canteen, whether it be the equipment in the school. This is a typical very small apartment, and I remember when I moved to Shanghai in 1998, the average space that every person had in Shanghai was 7 meters, right, of living space on average. These people are still the scariest people in China. They're the old ladies that work at the pharmacy shop, right? And then they make you go through cartwheels in a obstacle course in order to buy some Tylenol, and then they yell at you for buying Western medicine, right? And still, food was very simple. But after that, the adolescence was full of promise. Then the boom starts happening. Then the real estate's getting privatized. Then people start being able to think of, having a 中产阶级的存在, the middle class existence, which still today is a relatively sensitive word to talk about. But the point is that their adolescence was full of promise. Brands came out, traveling started, Shanghai lit up with neon, so it became actually, in Beijing and all, now of course, second, third, fourth, fifth tier cities experiencing the same phenomenon. These waves of development that is creating quite a bit of optimism. So the 80s was about getting rich. The road ahead was seen to be good when they were adolescents. There was a blue sky potential. And when I came into China in 1998, when we had to translate Pepsi's tagline, which in English was "ask for more," very Western selfishness, in China, it was 渴望无限, aspire to infinity. And I always say that past, present, and future, 在每一个中国人的心里有一条龙. There is a dragon in every heart of Chinese, but the fact is that the Chinese in the post-80s thought that they could really let it out and they would fly. So the 90s is quite different, actually, just a little bit the inverse. Childhood was relatively more wealthy. And again, I realize I'm talking now about first and second tier cities, not lower tier cities, but overall, it was relatively more wealthy. Disney came to Hong Kong. And now it's come to Shanghai, so the lines are so long that you might as well bring tents to sleep in. But, in terms of video games, in terms of golfing, in terms of the clubs, in terms of the phones, in terms of all of that, it was a wealthier childhood. But we all know what's happening. We are entering an era now, and we have entered an era of economic transformation, where the growth model of China, the urbanization growth model, which has been working so well for the past 30 years, is now being called into question, given the lack of clear reforms of both the hukou, residency reform, and also the land reform. So people don't know whether this model is sustainable, and people are asking questions. And people tend to think, well, as long as it doesn't affect me, I'll be okay. But the fact of the matter is that people are not as optimistic, though they're not fully pessimistic yet, and they still have faith that the government is going to make do somehow, but it's hard to see the path ahead. So in the 90s, the post-90s, they have an adolescence which is relatively uncertain. As somebody holding up a card here, we are the lost generation. I am confused about the world. And so getting rich is a little bit considered getting out of reach, all right? So we all know the Gaofu Shuai, the guy that looks just like that, and you have to be at least 180 centimeters to be Gaofu Shuai. If you're not, you're not, all right? And so they're the ones that get the pretty girls, but then you have the Diaosi, all right? These are the hoi polloi, the masses. Now, I don't know whether I should translate Diaosi, but it literally translates as to hanging silk, but it's a hair that comes from a non-respectable part of the body. Left behind. Take a look.
他们相貌丑陋，收入低微，一般使用诺基亚牌的手机或者山寨手机，穿假名牌，吃泡面或路边巷口的小店，偶尔去一次高档商店餐厅，连手都不知道放哪儿好。发型一般为平头、碎发或劣质染发剂染过的奇形怪状的发型。屌丝不爱运动，不爱拍照，要么瘦得和狗一样，要么胖得和猪一样。生活中屌丝颓废沉闷，要么表现得沉默寡言，要么歇斯底里的兴奋。屌丝的敌人是高富帅，梦中情人是女神，但是屌丝一般都没有女朋友，有的话也只是被当作备胎。屌丝一般在情人节、圣诞节等节日的时候，只能默默的祈祷在宾馆开房的高富帅们啪啪啪的时候轻点儿，因为他可能是屌丝以后的老婆。所以高富帅被称之为 Mr. Right， 而屌丝就被形象地称之为 Mr. Right Hand。上帝把一切都留给了高富帅，而留给屌丝的只有右手和右手运动之后的孤独，深深的孤独。
All right, so there are different dreams, relatively speaking. And again, I'm scared of sweeping generalizations, but then again, they're my craft and trade. Post-80s, then we're relatively optimistic towards the future. Post-90s now are relatively more pragmatic. So you have the post-80s that when they were young, they were naive, relatively speaking, a wide generation gap, but relatively more optimistic about the future. The post-90s, so you could call them the dreamers, right? They focus on the future, they strive for success, and they were really climbing up that mountaintop. The post-90s, is relatively doubtful. The generation's relationship is relatively more harmonious, and they are pragmatists. They want something that is going to work here and now. So they are doers. They are focusing on the present. They are focusing on creating a better life for themselves now, fairly close in. So into the post-90s world, a little bit more, these things should now become fairly obvious, okay? So I call them new minds in an old world. Now, what do I mean by new minds? I think it's quite obvious that they have been liberated. And we don't have time to talk about a lot of the vehicles of liberation, but digital, of course, cannot be understated in terms of opening up a broad worldview and giving a sense of empowerment. And we don't have time to talk about this today, but the young people of China have an extremely emotional relationship with their online identities. So it is a blank canvas of self-expression where they almost can say, some of them feel like they have double lives there. They can be who they really want to be because they are protected by the distance of anonymity. And now that WeChat is here, WeChat keeps everything nice and safe as well. So you're releasing yourselves from a safe distance only to people that you know, but it's still an idealized version of you. But the key point is that they're connected with the rest of the world a lot through technology. So take a look at this quote that we did in terms of meeting the BRIC millennials. I feel I have more in common with young people in other countries than I do with people from my own country. China is the highest. And one thing that China has always done and will always do well is it absorbs influences from abroad and it brings them back to apply them into Chinese context. But they love to connect with the outside world. I connect. Before I die, I want to see a united China, both united with itself and with the world. I want to associate with people from different cultures because when you associate with people from different cultures, it's not only enjoyable, but it creates a 世界观广大的, a broad worldview, which is an ultimate competitive advantage to master the system. They have consumer choice. Again, I won't get into the brands and the proliferation of brands in the luxury market. We don't have time to do all of that. But the fact is that brands are fundamental for self-expression in China. Other means are cramped, so people use brands not superficially, but as a way of saying to society who I am, what my aspirations are, and using brands as tools. So they have choice, not just about offline, but online. We all know about e-commerce, but the power of e-commerce releasing identity is fundamental, and we are free to learn, not just through traditional courses, but online as well. And so people seek experience, right? It is now a new experience, today's experience, being in the moment. Learning for the sake of learning, not knowing that it will be applied tomorrow. So you take a look at another question that we asked. I don't know what this would have been 10 years ago, but what constitutes a good long-term, a good investment, long-term travel, a gap year? China is saying that travel is not just about experience, it's also about, something that I'm going to be using later. One of the golden rules of marketing is in China, everything has to be a means to an end, but that still doesn't mean that you don't enjoy the journey towards the end. So people search for meaning in ways that are different. You've seen a lot more effort going into belonging to NGOs or starting to care more about, a green earth, as long as the result is practical. So whether it's understanding that changing demographics mean that older people, the mature market will need to be looked after, whether it's helping out people in the rural market, they do understand that China needs their help. And so there's a much broader palette of role models, like Huang Taoji. He basically opened a very upscale pancake shop in Beijing, and he became an online folk hero. Or Ma Jiajia, she was an online sex operator that turned into an offline sex operator, so that's called O2O. But she became a heroine as well, a very non-traditional heroine. So on one hand, what's the desire is of the new generation is they want to make my mark. I want to make my mark by pursuing my passion. Now, notice two words in here. One is my passion, right? That's who they really are, what they really want. But the other is my mark. They still want to be acknowledged for having achieved something, but it wants to be through who they are as opposed to through what society says they must do. But they are living in still an old world. China is still regimented and it is still conservative. Society is regimented and hierarchical. There are don't goes everywhere. I have been in Asia for 18 years, and when I came in 1998, I still had the same difficulty getting young people to express their point of view in a hierarchical situation as I do today. So yes, people are very self-expressive, but when it comes to the hierarchy, people are still very risk-averse because crossing the red line into overt rebellion is tantamount to being banished to the land of outcasts. So you see all of this still very much today. You see, policemen that if you cross the street at the wrong time will chop off your feet. There has not been any reform of the hukou system. So people, the class system in the urban areas is quite challenging. And you see teachers, all right, that when you see a school performance, it has been choreographed with utmost meticulousness or meticulosity. I don't know what noun that should be. But again, it's not about interpretation, it's about mastery. And also, more fundamentally, the definition of success hasn't gotten broader. It is still ultimately about finance, still ultimately about money. Money is still pooled to buy the house from the extended family because ultimately concrete manifestation of ability is fundamental for security. And the path to success is the same. In the past, of course, it was relatively narrow and it was, through the palace exams, but it was still about mastery of received wisdom. Today, of course, it's a different path, but it's still fairly regimented, and parents will not be proud of the son if they major in English literature at the University of Florida. They will be proud of the kids if they major in engineering at MIT. And I always say to kids when they go abroad, if you're going to go abroad, please do liberal arts, because then you can actually learn how to challenge convention, but instead people stick to what is a little bit safe and comfortable, all right? And the post-grad world is not certain. It's not a one-way ticket to glory like it was before. 15 years ago, 1 million people graduated from college every year. Now, 7 million people. There's a lot of competition for the top spots. And so this is what they call, I think, ant farms, right? Where people live together in very squalid conditions because they can't afford to make things after their college graduation. So, typical quote, I'm worrying about something. Girls in China are becoming materialistic. Let's not go there. That's a different topic, a different debate. But the guys feel tremendous burden because ultimately they are still the patriarch providers. I'm going off course. Without house, without girlfriend, would not marry me. My parents cannot help either. So I need to get a job with high payment. That's what I totally want. He does not look totally happy either. So there is anxiety. And prospects are still dictated by status, right? Just take a look at this right here. Of course, China always admires meritocracy. China has always admired peasants that become scholars, that become emperors. But still, interpersonal relationships is very high up there. It's not just what you know, it's also who you know. And some people are born outside the grid. So there is still an old world. I am held back by a regimented society. So the master tension that brands can and people can help solve is, I want to make my mark by pursuing my passion, but I am held back by a regimented society. And so really it's a question of resolving that tension. And here are 5 ways that marketers have learned to connect with this new generation. And I'm just going to go through some very, very quickly. Right? Number 1, and all of them are all about the juxtaposition of control on one hand, but on the other hand, self-expression and new experience. So turning experience into something that shows off your power, right? And so the first is to become a master of happiness, not just to be happy, but to become a master of happiness. So the old world fuels anxiety. Happiness is hard to reach. So you want to make happiness easy for the post-90s. So theme A, make happiness something that you can create. Give them the tools, give them the power to create their own happiness. Don't wait for happiness, but give them the platform to create it themselves. So take a look at what Coke did for its bottle lyrics.
可口可乐歌词瓶，我们把音乐歌词印在瓶身上。
So they're giving them a platform to express, but they're giving the tools.
让消费者来分享并表达自己的感觉。手机扫描瓶身，更能出现10秒歌曲片段。这些片段也能在微信或其他社交网络上分享，
Talk about this later, but sharing on social networks
变成一种全新的音乐表情符号。全新的可口可乐歌词瓶。
And you got it. So theme sub 1B, experience becomes the currency of happiness. Find happiness not just at the destination, but along the journey. And what's important, though, is that it needs to be converted into social currency. That on social networks, that happiness is actually, proof, okay, of success. So this is just something that was a documentary to Berlin by Thumb, by somebody that was famous online. But notice what he does. He turns every step into an opportunity to display his new experiences and get the following and likes on social networks. And so this is the engagement that they have with social platforms can't be underestimated. Or even Molly's photos. Now, she's an internet sensation, and she's going through a lot of different experiences. But take a look at Molly. Molly is everywhere. And she is a woman of the world, but she is the center of every single picture. And again, it is displayed on social networks. Or even North Face is all about collecting experiences, because Chinese really aren't into, hardcore hiking and camping. And then, of course, displaying them online as well. So, theme 2. Theme 1 is master happiness and turn happiness into social currency that's displayed on social platforms. Theme 2 is to fuel the butterfly effect. So the old school world, restricts new minds. It's difficult to make an impact, so you want to empower small actions. You want to turn small actions into ripples that go around the world. So this is just one example of a famous dance craze that started online, and then it turns up everywhere. Everybody would dream to be starting that trend. Or even if you take a look at the WeChat rent envelope spreading, your little bit of money, it's turning into a huge trend. So you're being part of greatness through a small action. Or even 11/11 Singles Day, which of course is state-sponsored retail therapy on an epic scale, brought to you by your government-supported Tencent.com. All right. Now they have, in 2015, 91 billion renminbi, or over almost 15 million. And when you ask 90% of the post-90s how much was sold on Tmall for Singles Day, it becomes a point of national pride. So they're saying, nope, see, our economy is still fine, thank you very much, and I contributed my 2 bits. And even in 2008, when patriotism was spreading across the nation during the Olympics, somebody starts with one red heart, and then the MSN Hearts for China turns into a flood of red hearts. So have somebody be part of the action, triggering a tidal wave, a butterfly effect, part of greatness. So theme 2 is fuel the butterfly effect. Theme 3, live large now. So we have declining social mobility, uncertain future. So you want to make the most of today, but you got to make it epic. So one thing is to celebrate people who are not overthinking things. Celebrate people who have the courage to just do now. Nike Running does that by making fun of people who think too much. So here this is saying, "Bando bu yong shangma," so you don't need to go to class, huh? All right? So these are people that have the courage not to just focus on academics. Or here, isn't there an easier way to lose weight? So it's focusing on people who are not traditional. Or even here, all right, aren't you playing a little bit too hard? Or tough. So again, you're celebrating people who have the courage to just do something different rather than just assuming that they want to. And theme 3B, get more from less. And this is why IKEA has become so successful recently in China, because they were able to adjust the price-value equation so that you could transform the look of your house, but still with cost of materials and products that are less expensive than they are in the outside world. Golden rule of marketing number 1 is most Chinese people are less willing to pay for goods that are consumed in private, in the home, than in public in order to charge a price premium, maximize public consumption. But take a look at IKEA.
如果我家能够再大一点的话，我就把所有朋友都请到我家里来。但是太小了，连坐2个人都觉得很拥挤，没办法实现这个梦想。第一次看到房间的时候，真的让我很意外，没想到这么小的房间居然能够照顾那么多人。
So your living room is your stage. Turning private into public at the right price point. Theme 4, orchestrate togetherness. Okay, so again, this is all about empowerment, all right? So Chinese is still a non-individualistic society. The individual does not exist independent of his obligations and responsibilities to others. So if you are able to master, if you are able to stand on top of the mountain and orchestrate a new social dynamic that still reinforces ancient Confucian imperatives, you win. So the fast new world disrupts the old order, but there's lack of authentic relationships. So you want to initiate dynamic interaction. So theme 4A, spark a new family dynamic. There will always be Chinese New Year. It will always be a sin not to go home for Chinese New Year, but through technology, you can make it youthful and fun, and you can upend the norms of boredom. Techno bonding, brought to you by digitally native Post-90s.
团聚畅爽就要可口可乐。
Or rule with togetherness. Now this is for, by the way, if you ever ask Chinese guys, are Chinese women strong or not strong? They're so frightened they don't answer, right? I believe that Chinese women are, and I say this with nothing but admiration, the strongest, most self-possessed women in the world, right? Which is why Adidas is using that strength to manage, right? In a campaign where you rule with togetherness. So take a look at My Girls, hashtag My Girls. Hashtag is something that they use on Twitter. Twitter is not a strategy. This is tonally perfect. So she's bringing the group together. Turns somebody into the ringleader. All in for my girls. All in is inclusive. My girls is my stage. 4C, strengthen the bonds of intimacy. Reinforce closeness in a fast and fleeting world. And that's exactly what McDonald's did with the most successful summer promotion in China history, where it said, meet up at McDonald's. Again, this was O2O, encouraging dynamic interaction, first starting on, well, here. Oops.
真朋友大测试，你有多少真朋友？哇，300多个，厉害啊！谁常跟你网上聊天呢？还聊私人话题的，还不会泄密的？看，这才是你的真朋友。等等，那最近见过面的呢？真有情，
So the answer is a
是时候约朋友了，
milkshake at McDonald's.
去麦当劳见个面吧。
So this is so smart. They're using social platforms, they're using promotions, they're using online chat groups to bring people from a virtual relationship, mix and match, dating games, friendship games that bring people together, initiate that friendship, and then bring it into an offline environment, and in the process sell a lot of drinks. And so this was one of the most successful. This is about 5 years ago, but I still think it sets the stage. Theme 5, the final theme, is the unconventional genius. Celebrate the unconventional genius. And whenever I want to make people in China a little bit scared, but a little bit affectionate towards me, I say, 天不怕, 地不怕, 就怕有他人, 谈判用普通话. And that means there's nothing to fear in heaven or on earth, and I can say this, except for a Jew who negotiates in Chinese. And the reason for that is that Chinese ultimately very much respect clever resourcefulness, right? And when you ask the thing about the Jews, they'll say the secrets of the Jews is that they stay close together as a community. They use that closeness to be able to master the system. And so this is what they say. The understated resourcefulness is a weapon of success. So people who are unconventional and can deploy that win. So theme 5A, create your own stage. Build a platform to project your unique talents. This is why Nike has succeeded in China more recently than 10 years ago, is because it's finally starting to understand that Western individualism, just do it, challenging your sake for just the sake of challenging yourself, doesn't go very far. You need to use sports, 用运动. And here you have a perfect fusion of the Nike spirit and social acknowledgement by a kid that says, give me the ball.
给我个球场，给我双球鞋，给我 DJ， 给我 MC， 给我观众，给我对手，还有个队友，给我挑战，我随时应战。这球很合理呀！给我抓到破绽，我绝不会手软。 给我个回放，给我去选秀，给我第一轮，给我握个手，给我份合同，给我杜兰特，给我科比，给我个外号，给我条规矩去打破，给我焦点，给我，不用给我风头，我会自己去赢回来。 把球给我。
I love this scene. Theme 5B, reconfigure the hierarchy, but do it in a way that doesn't rebel. Take a look at this guy with his not annoying boss.
我是不是对你们太好了？
好你个头啊！
再说一遍。
好你个头！
再说一遍。
好你个头！
再说一遍。
好你个头！清健难挡，含 MT 绿茶、清健无糖薄荷糖。胖头鱼，小气鬼，大冬瓜，曼
No rebellion
清健
here.
难挡。
Clever resourcefulness, or just make smart sexy.
乘客请买票，前方到站是八王子西。
哎，我手机没了，你们看到我手机了吗？我手机没了。哎，美女，美女，我手机好像被人偷了，能不能请你帮个忙，给我手机打个电话，我找一下我自己的手机啊？
好吧。
谢谢啊。
你是谁？你是谁？你到底是谁？
哎哎哎！
你是谁？你是谁？你到底是谁？
原来是在包里，谢谢你啊。
美女，俺手机也丢了。
So, what we've basically said today is that due to different formative experiences between the 80s generation and the 90s generation, their attitudes towards life have evolved. New youth and old youth are not exactly the same. New youth are relatively focused on today, they're relatively focused on now, but they still have anxiety. They are new minds, people who want to make their mark by pursuing their passion, but let's not think that China has evolved at warp speed towards westernization. They are held back by a regimented society. And so to touch the heart and to earn a high profit margin, what marketers and brands and businesses can do is to just abide by 5 simple themes. First is to master happiness. Don't just be happy, but a demonstration of your ability to command and control and translate into social currency on social platforms. 2, fuel the butterfly effect. Be a part of greatness, or better yet, trigger greatness. 3rd, live large now. Celebrate the epic inside small moments that are today. 4, orchestrate together. So China is a social society, a Confucian society, not an individualistic society, but let people be able to command and reconfigure that hierarchy. And finally, the unconventional genius. Celebrate somebody who does have the non-conventionality inside of him or her, but make sure we never cross the red line into overt rebellion. And so with that, those are our thoughts on the Post-90s generation. New world, old minds. Thank you. Oops, old world, new minds. Thank you. Now, I don't know whether we have any questions, because obviously I've said quite a bit of, or we don't have time, provocative thoughts in here, so I'd like to hear some challenges, perhaps, or clarifications. Anybody?
The quote from, oh, sorry, thank you. The quote from Li Ning mentioned celebrity, and I wonder how celebrity endorsement fits into this. Who's the perfect celebrity, or is it more now about influencers online?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive, right? But I think that the key thing is that people are more sophisticated today than they were 10 years ago. So it's not like you can just have any well-known person, and then that is going to give your brand automatic credibility. Chinese shoppers are savvy shoppers, so you got to match the celebrity with what the category is all about. So you need to select it very carefully. But the point about online opinion leaders is absolutely fundamental. One of the key dynamics is the outsized role of online opinion leaders they have. But again, you have to choose the right one where their expertise for the category is relevant, or else people will laugh at you. So it's higher risk, higher return. You can harness the relevance of a celebrity, but you can squander your authenticity if you just go for any bland celebrity. Yes?
Did I understand correctly that you use him as a classical example of a failure, no? Who didn't get it?
Yes, I use the brand, all right, as a classic example of a failure, not the man, okay? I just used his quote to demonstrate the fact that he was celebrating a ethos of just experiment. All right, he was misinterpreting the post-90s generation as an experimental generation that wants new experiences for the sake of themselves. No, Chinese people, as I said, young and old, cherish freedom, but in a framework. So they need social architecture where they can navigate the rules as opposed to create the new rules, or even interpret the rules. Sorry.
In this connected online culture and society that's emerged, what is the relationship between the availability of information, restrictions on information, and the authority of the state? The authority of the state, how does that all play out in the minds of these?
Well, this is, again, this is only my point of view. But I think that if you compare present to past in terms of availability of both information, sensitive and otherwise, and the ability to be self-expressive, it's like night and day. So I personally believe, right, that the Chinese people are dramatically liberated versus before. The only thing is, right, that they are not interested in challenging fundamental conventions unless there is an injustice that affects somebody at a very personal level, right? So when you do corporate responsibility, for example, you do not want to just celebrate Mother Earth or the glory of green. You need to make sure that you bring it right back, okay, into the family's life. So your baby will stay healthy. Your kids will learn, you know. So my point is that unless you personalize something very dramatically, social networks don't go abuzz. And so there's not as much concern as one might think regarding the restrictions. So for those two reasons. So I think that's still very wonderful time for most youth. Alice. Sorry.
I saw a wonderful play when I was in New York recently called Privacy. And they make you bring your phone in and you experience a play with about privacy. So the question for China, recently there was a young woman who I understand committed suicide, and because of I think her through hacking or through whatever her fortune, or I guess saving money for her college, and she squandered it. It was and there's been a lot of incidents like that. Not just younger generation, but older generation. So in the idea of privacy, and then also the crime, right? That area, how naive are the post-90s, or just the idea of their thought about privacy?
I think that privacy is one expression of safety, okay? I think that if you take a look at the two things that have really exploded, all right, online, okay, one is WeChat as a app. Right? And the other is e-commerce. Let's first take a look at e-commerce. It was very slow to take off, actually. Right? It took several years before it went through this huge inflection point. You know, but what did the government do? All right, and the companies that are supported by the government do? They made it safe. They made it safe through, amongst many things. All right, Alipay. All right, so basically your money was put, you know, outside. So virtual transactions became safe. They made it safe in terms of very low delivery costs. They made it safe regarding the ability to test the merchandise for weeks before returning it, right? So it wasn't before the Chinese fulfilled the fundamental need of reassurance, right, that Taobao and all of them took off. And keep in mind, right now, even their business models are very different. In America, it's much more category specific. It's much more retailer specific. But in China, you have a virtual reality, all right, of huge mega malls. And that's safe too, because it shows that they're going to be respectable and they have the authority to make sure that the supply chains are against the fakes, number one. And number two, it is infinite transparency in terms of pricing, all right? So the reassurances that are necessary to get people to behave and act online are just as important as the expression itself. And WeChat, again, I say, is much more successful than Weibo, all right, because it is selective, all right? You need permission to go in. So when people do express themselves, it's only their friends, their pre-selected friends that approve of it. And even then, you see a lot of avatars and a lot of anonymity in terms of the photographs that people are taking. In fact, so many of people don't take pictures of themselves and show them on their WeChat. You know, they're taking pictures of the food and things. You know, so all I'm saying is they're suspicious, but China business is smart enough to take that fear and turn it into a competitive advantage. Yes?
Can I just ask if you're seeing the younger generation change in a way? When you look at, say, the older generation, they have things like mengniu,
They have
the
what?
milk, the
Mengniu?
milk. Mengniu, is it called? I think the milk.
Mengniu, yeah.
Mengniu.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well, it's same thing.
Cantonese as well. But you know, where nobody seems to care about anybody else because they're quite happy to produce milk that poisons babies and things, and nobody trusts all that. The things that they produce, and so they buy everything overseas, which is why we can't, you know, it's an offense to traffic in milk in Hong Kong these days, baby milk powder.
Right.
But so is the younger generation changing, or I mean, how is that moving on with the younger generation?
Well, I think that people have always been horrified by, and I think that melamine scandal in 2008, I think it was, you know, brought everybody very much out and aware of the challenges of safety for organizations that are not have solid corporate governance, right? So I don't think that, you know, people are becoming less, I'm not sure if I quite get the question, but people always are angry at abuse of the system, always, especially when it affects the helpless and it's personalized. But I think in the consumer area, there's been a lot of progress in safeguards. And I think that the suspiciousness or relatively lack of suspicion is talking about the fact that commercial terms have evolved amongst the new generation. Yes.
Hi. You mentioned that wealth remains the biggest marker of success in China. But after wealth, what do you see are the emerging markers of success?
Let's put it this way. When you go on the luxury pyramid, go up the luxury pyramid, all right? It goes from very bling down, and then as you move up, it needs to be substance that shines. And then at the very top of it, it's mastery and it's personalization. So things become much more understated, and things become much more a demonstration of your resourcefulness and of your savvy and of your mastery. So depth is very much appreciated, but it's depth that has to pay off, right? So you're never going into, say, secret luxury or anything like that you would have in the West, you know, and so things always still need to be externalized, but it needs to be done from substance. So people don't like empty money. They want money that comes from substance. So the Chinese are fundamentally into mastery and expert power, in my opinion. Okay.
Tom, I am of the hippie generation.
No, you're not.
I am.
You grew up in the 80s.
Thank you. I grew up in the 60s. By the time I went to MBA school in 1974, there was the highest number of enrollment. All those hippies became MBAs. So what will happen to your 90s in 20 years' time? Or 50?
I think the same thing that happened to the hippies, okay? And it's not going to be in 20 years' time. Ultimately, this is what I would call the dream phase, all right? This is the phase where people are not yet married and they're not yet have burdened with the responsibility of children. So I personally think that people become very pragmatic as soon as they have to get into society. So I don't think that you're going to have people that grow old on the communes.
Any more?
Thank you. Oh.
I just wondered how you see kind of clamp down affecting any of your theories here, and whether the behavior is changing at all, or whether it's just foreign press getting excited.
I think that you know, most people are they're getting a little bit doubtful of Xi Jinping, but most people still like him. You know, I mean, most people, the anti-crackdown is still seen as rather courageous, and you know, because again, this is something that is true of every single Chinese. The only absolute truth in China is that chaos is evil and stability is sublime. Stability is the platform on which progress is constructed. So I don't think that there is a rebellion against Xi Jinping. I think that there's still hope that he will make it possible to reform the economy through the crackdown. But people are getting a little bit less optimistic that that is the case. But still, he's a classical Chinese person that people admire for courage and the ability to forge order from chaos. That's transgenerational.
If Ken Wilcox has lived in China for a couple of years, even at an older age, Ken, and now co-chair of our Northern California Center, unless you have something else to say, if not, we'll call it quit, but it's up to you, Ken.
I'm fine.
You're fine. Tom,
Thank
great
you.
to have you. Wonderful
Thank you.
talk. Thanks.
Thank you.